Alright, so Hannibal came out in 2001, 10 years after Silence of the Lambs. It sees the return of Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starling, albeit Clarice Starling is now played by Julianne Moore, meaning that Anthony Hopkins, along with Frankie Faison, plays Barney, are the only two that come back. Two actors that fuzz. Yeah, and this one is a sequel because it takes place 10 years after the events of Silence of the Lambs. Hannibal Lecter is still on the loose. And we are introduced to another antagonist by that of one Mason Verger, who was once one of Lecter's patients that he horribly scarred. But he gave him something that made him susceptible to his suggestions, and he made him cut himself. I don't understand it, but who knows? Yes. So, right off the bat, I've heard a lot of things about how this is not a very good movie, about how it's terrible, and that it should, as a sequel to Silence of the Lamb, it should be embarrassed. This is not that bad. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. It gets weird, and we'll get to it, but it's not that bad, honestly. Not at all. There's some logic issues. We'll get to those, but yeah. So we start off with Frankie Faison's character Barney talking with Mason Verger, who's our quote-unquote villain. Hannibal Lecter's always the villain. I'm sorry. Except for maybe in Red Dragon, if this is a remake of Manhunter, he wasn't really the villain. But he was the main villain. A lot of people say Buffalo Bill was the villain. No, was the villain in Silence of the Lambs, and no, he wasn't. He was a side villain. He was the one they were trying to capture, but Hannibal Lecter was the main villain. I'm sorry. And here, in spite of the fact that Mason Verger is presented as the antagonist, and they make this character as evil as can possibly be, almost comedically evil. He's a pedophile that got away with it and has immunity because of something. He's scarred and he's after Lecter, and he's, they make him as scarred as they possibly can be so that he's more repulsive than Lecter. But at the back of my mind, who do we spend most of the runtime with? Lecter. This guy is presented as our villain, and he's in 15% of the film. If even. Maybe 25% of the film. He's in 1/4 of the film. Compared to Lecter, who's in most of it. You see him at the beginning. There's a scene about 10 minutes later where he calls Starling. And he's sprinkled throughout the film. But very lightly until the end, when his plan comes to fruition. But I'm sorry, even in Wikipedia has it listed that he's the villain. He's really not. He's another side villain like Buffalo Bill. He's not a main villain, in my eyes at least. We spend most of the film tracking Lecter. And another thing I don't like is that Clarice, who was like the main character in Silence of the Lambs, and she sort of is here, but she's often pushed to the side. In Silence of the Lambs, she was going places, trying to track down, right? Here, she's stuck at her desk for most of the runtime, listening to old recordings and trying to, look at stuff. That's all she does. We follow Giancarlo Giannini as Inspector Pazzi for most of the runtime, only for him to get ganked so that we can then have Clarice finish off the film going against Lecter. And even that doesn't really work for me. Like, it just doesn't. There's no. With this being the last in the continuity of films, there's no real tie-up. There's loose ends. Hannibal's on the run later. Clarice may be arrested, but maybe not. Krendler is dead because his brain was cooked. But I don't know. It just doesn't. It's not a satisfying conclusion to me to this film. But yes, this movie takes place 10 years, like I said, third time now, after Silence of the Lambs, which I'm going to point out took place in 1990. Okay? Because it came out in 91, but it took place in 1990. So this is taking place in the year 2000 then. Okay? So, Clarice, she gets a hot tip about, I have some information. She talks to Verger and then is on a hot trail trying to figure out where he is. We find out he is in Rome, Italy, under the alias Dr. Fell. What kind of name is that anyway? And he tricks Giancarlo Giannini, or Pazzi, excuse me. But then Pazzi gets a little iffy. And here is where we come to my biggest problem with this movie. So Pazzi logs on to this website of the most wanted criminals website. And right there in the center is Hannibal Lecter, which he realizes is Dr. Fell, so now he's going to track him. My biggest problem is, if Hannibal Lecter is one of the biggest well-known criminals on the FBI most wanted list, no doubt, how is he able to get away with as much as he does in this film? He's able to work in a museum or whatever it is. He's able to walk freely. He wears a hat. So what? He's able to walk freely. He's able to go unnoticed. Even Pazzi doesn't know it's him until he gets a little, not at first at least. He's able to walk around. He's a well-known person by this point. Sure, he escaped 10 years prior, but he doesn't look any different. I just don't get it. He's able to walk around all freely with no one recognizing him. Bullshit. It's bullshit. One person should recognize him besides Pazzi. Right? Pazzi even tries to get his, his thumbprint, which he does, but it results in a death. Pickpocket, which Pazzi really couldn't. And another thing, Pazzi could be another side villain, because he's trying to get this, he wants the reward money from Verger. And that's what it all is about. And eventually that just leads to both him and Clarice, or I should say, both Lecter and Clarice being kidnapped by Verger. And Pazzi is just murdered by Lecter. Because we follow him throughout most of the film, but now he's done. His time in the movie is done. So we gotta go back to Clarice. And so he has to die now. So it's just like, okay, we're killing him, and we're gonna follow Pazzi again. Anyways, it was also kidnapped. She starts to figure out what's going on. And we get to the ending part of this film. Which, by the way, is Clarice the only good person in this film? Because there's also Krenler, played by Ray Liotta, who does his role really well, but he's an asshole. And at one point, he takes a bribe from Verger to throw Clarice off the case. And he does. He gets her off the case so that Verger can have his way with Lecter, but then she ends up pushed into this anyway. Then we get to the ending of this film. Okay, so Lecter, because beginning, Barney gives Verger the face mask Lecter has, and of course that just leads to later when he has to he puts it back on Lecter, and he's gonna basically feed him to some boars they've been training to eat people. But Lecter's able to escape and basically feed the Verger to the boars. And again, this also feels like this guy was in the film as sort of a villain, and now he's not needed anymore because Lecter's going to become the main villain. So just kill him, get rid of him. We're following these two characters here and there throughout the film, and mostly Potsy. We see his wife, his personal stuff, and everything. We're following him through most of this. Then he's just killed off unceremoniously. Ceremoniously, excuse me. And then we have Verger, who is like a protagonist in this for a little while. And then when it's time for his plan to fail, he's gone. So now we end up with what we wanted to happen the entire fucking movie. Clarice versus Lecter. However, we don't get that because she is loopy the entire climax because of what did he say it was? Chlorophyll? No. It's not chloroform. It's they put it on you. Morphine. They say they put it in you when you're in hospital stuff. Morphine. She's on morphine. And they end up in Krenler's, I don't know, vacation home. And, Lecter comes in, surprises Krenler, and then when Clarice wakes up, she comes down the stairs, she's trying to figure out. She calls the police and tells them, hey, this is where this is what's happening, you gotta come here. And then comes downstairs, and we see Krenler sitting there with his hat on backwards, and right away that tells me, I'm like, we've never seen him like that for the entire movie. Something's going on with his head. The right to something going on with his head. Is his brain gone? He's acting very weirdly, and it does not really explain why he's acting weird. Is it because is he morphined up too? Is he all drugged? He honestly drugged, but yeah. And honestly, this is kind of funny to me, the way that there was two funny scenes with Ray Liotta. This one, he's like, hello Clarice. Who's Clarice? That's Clarice, Agent Starling. I'm Agent Starling, me. Oh, okay. And then hi. Say hello, Agent Starling. Hello, Agent Starling. It's kind of funny. He's all stuff. And then earlier in the film, he's looking over stuff. She's listening to one of the tapes, and she just unplugs it and lets it play. He's gee. Gives him a heart attack. That made me laugh. But here, yeah, we get to, if you already know this, yeah, and you already know it, but yeah, he cuts open Krenler's head, he takes out a piece of the brain, fries it up, and feeds it to him. Oh, that's good. It's brain food. Yeah, I know, bad joke. But we always say it's food for thought. But yeah. And then Clarice tries to get away, but he traps her in the fridge by putting her ponytail in there. By the way, are we to assume he undressed her, dressed her up, and then put her in a dress, and then put her hair in a ponytail, all while she was passed out? Now, there have always been some sexual tension between himself and Clarice. Are we to believe that he didn't try to have his way with her while she was, you know, I'm just saying. Oh, it's also been implied that maybe he's homosexual? I don't think so. Maybe. I think it's ever... I don't know. I don't judge. Either way. It's okay with me. But, no, I just don't think so. No, that was both of them. I'll say his... I really don't know. Anyway. She tries to get away, and then we do this thing where she handcuffs him, and so he's like going to cut it, and it cuts. And the next we see, though, she's running down the hill as the cops show up, and she's got both her hands. And then we see him later, and he's got his arm in a sling, so we're to believe he cut his hand. But when he does that, see you later, he goes like this earlier, and she's like she's in pain. But she's also on morphine, so I don't know. And then there's nothing. There's no epilogue for Starling, so we don't know what happened to her, even after all these years. There's been no direct sequel to this. So, yeah. I don't care if there's not another book. You know, you got writers. Write a script. And then we just see Lecter on the plane, and he feeds this kid some of Krendler's brain. End of the movie. And it's just like, it's so open-ended because most likely they wanted to do another sequel. Only problem is, I don't think this was received the way they wanted it to be received. So instead of trying to convince the guy to write another book or just write another sequel, straight themselves, they're like, well, there's 2 more books we could do. So they did Red Dragon, which is basically remaking Manhunter, and then Hannibal Rising. But there was no more... Is that Richard Brake? I swear to God. That's Richard Brake. Looks like him. But, yeah, I want a sequel to this. I want a sequel. Bring back Anthony Hopkins one last time, okay? Bring back Julianne Moore. There needs to be another sequel to this because it's too open-ended. There's nothing. I thought perhaps Lecter died in this, and that's why they had to do prequels. But he's still on the go. Even Clarice doesn't die. I thought they both died or something. But nothing. So I don't understand it. Why isn't there another sequel? I know this movie didn't do very well, but still. As it is, though, I gotta give it middle of the road. It just... There's... They maybe scratch my head. But I don't think it's that bad. Not as much as people want it to be. They say, oh, it's terrible. It's not terrible. It's just not that bad. So, what are your thoughts on Hannibal? No comments. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. We're going to take a break, though. Because we have to journey to Doobie Tuesday for the next review. And then we'll get on Red Dragon. Till then, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I've been Scotty, and I'll see you in the next one.